one thing I want to take a quick look at now is an MBT video about Genesys format. And this is a topic that really interests me. And I also am interested to hear your guys' input on this. Because this was, of course, the first time that they applied the new Genesys structure at a YCS, which is something that, as a fan of Genesys, which I do consider myself a fan of the Genesys format, I do play it, and I think it is awesome. I was unsure how to feel about how Genesys was handled at this YCS and how it will be handled in the future. And just for context, I don't know if he elaborates in this video, but the way it's been done at this YCS now is that there was a Genesys YCS happening at the same time as the main event, almost at the same time. At least I can only speak for Europe. I do not know how it was in NA, but for us, the Genesys, it was called the Genesys Proto YCS, started on Saturday, basically after like 3 rounds of the main event. Like they started at like 1 p.m., I think. So basically, technically, if you had a really rough start to your tournament and you went like 0-2 or 0-3 and then you dropped, you could have played the Genesys main event. Otherwise, if you were playing day 1, you could not play Genesys. Which on the one hand, I really liked the fact that Genesys got the attention of a full tournament instead of just having like side events, basically. But I also wasn't happy about having to decide, basically, right? I wasn't happy about like, okay, if you choose the main event, you don't get a chance to play Genesys. So I was really curious about how Genesys was received, and I was, from my first impression, I was positively surprised about the reception of Genesys this YCS. I've talked to multiple friends who have chosen Genesys over the main event, and they had a good time. They had a good time at the Genesys Proto YCS, and they were like, you know what? I actually prefer Genesys format over the current TCG format. I want to choose Genesys over the YCS, which is something that I was a little bit worried about, because I was a little scared that maybe no one was going to play Genesys. Everyone was going to play Advanced Constructed main event. But there was a couple of people who actually went like, no, I think Genesys is better than Advanced Constructed. I'm going to play Genesys. And I think that's good for Genesys. I think that is good. And I think there are things in Genesys that are better than Advanced Constructed. I'm not saying it is better in general, but because I do enjoy Advanced Constructed a lot at the moment as well. But I think there are things in Genesys that are awesome. And I think it's worth exploring. I think it's worth trying. And I think it is worth considering. And if they keep doing this for every YCS, there could be formats in the future where I can see myself playing Genesys over Advanced Construct. But I want to hear from MBT, because MBT, I think, played in Genesys as well, or NA, instead of the main event. And I think that's interesting. That's good.
Asmodeus. Let's talk about Genesys format. So this past weekend was the 300th YCS, and the proving ground for Genesys format at large-scale tournaments. Previously, Genesys has been available at YCSs as an invitational. You would play a pod, and the first, or sometimes first and second, players in that pod would move on to a secondary tournament that happened a little bit later. At the 300th YCS, they did something a little bit different. They hosted a main event at the same time as the advanced main event, in which individuals could play Genesys format in lieu of Advanced. These proto YCSs were conducted like YCSs and attracted pretty reasonable crowds. But they were also the first opportunity for people who had played Genesys to play like a reasonable number of rounds. Previously, to get to an invitational, you had to go like 3-1 or 4-0, followed by just winning a top 64.
And this is a big deal, right? Like what they had previously was obviously a solid tournament or a solid side event structure, but realistically, from a competitive standpoint, playing a top 8 bracket to qualify for a single elimination tournament is not the greatest experience. You know, it's fine, but it is not like it's not the same as playing like 10 or 11 rounds or whatever. But yeah. Hey Josh, just wanted to say I really enjoyed our match. It was fun playing you, and we had some good chance. Yeah, congrats on, what was it, top 4 in the end? That's very nice.
bracket. Now you had to sit down and play.
It was a good match. We talked about it earlier in my tournament report. I told them you played well. I couldn't do anything.
11, 12 rounds of Genesis. So people started labbing. What's more, the format is now old enough that metagames are starting to develop. And I'm excited to say that alongside myself, other content creators are putting in the work of helping people figure out what is good and what is bad. As a result, this is the first tournament that I think tested Genesis format's staying power and not just its ability to be a weird dalliance.
So because the question is probably going to come up, and I do think it's an interesting point, I took the effort to try and find out how many people entered the Genesis events, which at the European YCS, I think it was capped at 256 players. And they did not hit the cap of 256, but they got somewhat close. I think it was almost 200 players in Europe and over 200 in the US, which is not bad considering it's the first time it happened. Of course, if you are a fan of Genesis format, you would love it to just completely cap out at 256 and everyone wants to and everyone wanted to play and not even everyone got a ticket. But honestly, it was pretty close to full cap, which I think is solid. I will say I was pessimistic about it because from my perspective, I didn't like the fact that it was happening simultaneously and you had to choose. And I was ready for people to choose. I was expecting most people like myself to choose the advanced constructed main event. But I was positively surprised by those numbers.
During times that the TCG sucks balls. And how'd it go? Well, pretty good. For me. I ended the event 14th place. That's right, top 16, which would in a civilized country be considered a top. But unfortunately, all tops are now top 8, so bubbled out again. But still, like my best performance in a YCS ever. I think I'd be remiss if I didn't milk it a little bit. So as a result, we're going to walk through my deck and its choices. We're going to talk about the wider Genesis metagame and what you should be concerned about if you aim to play the format.
The reason we're watching this is because MBT made a Twitter thread on this, and I read through it, and I thought it was a lot of interesting stuff. So I hope it's also in here.
What the experience of playing it at a YCS was like, and we're going to talk about some point changes I would like to see in an upcoming format. That's right, we're just doing anything. This is just the Genesis video, big Genesis video with a bunch of crap in it. Let's start with the deck. So here's the list, and it is Cool Tune. Not super surprising to people who've played the format. I think this deck
Gravity
is extremely
Collapse.
good. It's very flexible. It's hard to pin down. There are a couple of decks in the format, Monarch and Galaxy Regenesis in particular, that I think automatically win if you don't draw hand traps, and this is a deck that gets to play a lot of hand traps as well as access some in-engine.
What is this site? I don't know. I've never seen it.
Of one of the incredibly powerful cards released in BitBro, Zaylin the Shackled
Genuinely
Dragon.
have no idea.
I'll walk you through the choices that I made. First and foremost, 3 Rico, 3 Mix is not particularly surprising. 1 Red Nova is not super standard. People are usually on 2 or 3, but this card excels in multiples a lot more if you're playing the Herald of Orange Light package, which I wish I had. I was playing it until the 11th hour, but I cut it for 3 copies of DD Crow and some different choices with respect to the
DD Crow seems kind of ass in Genesis right now. From what I've heard, it's probably a good side deck card, but like it doesn't seem great against Cool Tune and Vanquish.
We've got a driver for some deltas later on. 3 Synchro Overtake, 3 Cool Tune Synchro, 3 JJ Cool Tune, 2 Duelist Genesis. Duelist Genesis could probably go up to 3, and JJ Cool Tune could probably go down to 2.
I like it. I like 3 Duelist Genesis in Cool Tune and Genesis.
Synchro Overtake and a Duelist Genesis.
I don't like 3 field spells. Other than that, it seems fine.
I did love playing this card at multiples. I know some individuals are only playing 1. I found the additional copies made hands way better because then it opens up a sort of flexibility for your trackmaker search, and more importantly allows you to play through things, functioning sort of as a way to trade for a 1-to-1 hand trap in hands where you expect your opponent is going to interrupt you. I liked it a great deal. 3 Effect Veiler, now that Trinities go at the end of the format. 3 Cyframe Gear Delta, the Q and Clip that are both pointed. 3 Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, and 3 Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill, which is not a particularly good card this format. I think it's kind of poorly positioned.
I found the same thing. When I played Mourner at locals in this deck, I felt like Mourner was kind of
the
bad.
Ultimate Slayer package, and then
I found good spots for Ghost Ogre and Veiler, but Mourner kind of sucked.
Zaylin the Shackled Dragon. Usually in the dark, my end board would be Remix mechanics, plus Zaylin, which you can make off of one card, or with better hands, like an up track maker that could then be converted into something like a Loudness War. Any situation where I could have Zaylin on board with like a clip in hand or a Cool Tune Synchro set drastically improves the ability of this card to do anything.
Can you play around Nibiru with Zaylin in this deck? Is there a way to chain something to Nibiru?
Doomsy. This is a great way to tribute over Deoctarus. Scared about Super Quantum. This outs Magnum. There's a number of decks that just like end up making one too many guys, and this is a guy that then you don't have to worry about. Artifact Lancia was something I was off and on over and over again, and I'm so happy I was on. It is a card that does something against some of the top decks, and for that reason deserves a place over cards that frequently
it is a
do
card
nothing
that does
against
something.
a lot of the top decks, like DD.
I know. You got me. I'm in.
This in the most frequently in testing against Monarch because it's a mechanism that keeps them off.
I'm convinced.
Like Pantheism plays. You have to be kind of careful with it though, because if you activate it in response to like a Pantheism pitching something relevant, then they can maybe make use of the something relevant. I got myself in hot water a couple of times because my opponent would go Master Play and I'd immediately Lancia, then they'd be able to send the trap card, which gets them access to like the Zaborg summon on my turn. That said, that's preferable to them putting in a Pantheism if you don't think that you can get them on the crackback, which usually you can't because decks like that have a lot of survivability. 3 Ultimate Slayer, 3 Cosmic Cyclone, 1 Cool Tune Playlist, and 3 Gravity Collapse. This is in the main a lot of the time. I didn't love it in the main. Gravity Collapse here was in almost every Cool Tune list. The board plan in the dark would be I would just take out the Cyframe Gear, Delta, and the Driver when going first and board in these 4. Gravity Collapse was the worst card in my deck. I know a lot of individuals, specifically Kevin, were champing at the bit to get this card pointed to 100, and to be clear, I think that should happen. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but all of the top decks have a way to play around this. Think about Draco Tail. It doesn't commit to a summon until it is well past the point of no return. Archmage can just turbo Graflair, who's special.
Yeah, there are ways to play around it, but that card says your opponent cannot summon a monster until the end of the turn, so
by way of an effect, and then can
oh no, man.
Collapse.
I was hoping for more of a like can we talk about the experience? I don't care about the Cool Tune deck. I'm sorry. I love the Cool Tune deck, but that's not why I'm watching the video right now.
So the Genesis event started a little later than Advanced, which was interesting to say the least. It meant that if you had a card that had people who were in Advanced and people who were in Genesis, one of them just kind of had to wait around for what was supposed to be a half hour, but ended up being more like an hour. The Genesis event started at 10:30 on Saturday and went through 7 rounds of Swiss, followed by 4 rounds of Day 2 and a cut to top 8 on Sunday. This, first and foremost, I would say is probably wrong. I don't know why it panned out like this, but doesn't it make more sense to be 8 rounds Day 1 than 3 rounds Day 2? That's just much more analogous to how a normal YCS works. Like, why would you play more than half of another Saturday on Sunday? It was very strange. I will say the vibes were immaculate. I say this a lot of the time about a lot of events that I go to, but everyone was there having fun. Everyone was super excited to be playing Genesis, and importantly, everyone was playing meta. Looking around, I expected some people to be like, oh, I played Blackwing back in the day, so I brought Blackwing. And there just wasn't very much of that at all, especially post like round 2. It was individuals who by and large were playing the top decks in the format and playing them very capably. I saw maybe one deck that I wasn't super prepared for, and that's a good thing. It's fantastic to know that there is a meter stick by which you can engage with the format. It isn't just people throwing things at a wall and seeing what.
Okay, this is what this is going to. I was like, okay, because this is something that for some people could be a negative thing, that like people are playing meta, but I think this is something to understand as well. Like, no matter what, if you want people to take this seriously, then there is always going to be a meta that develops. And I mean, Genesis, at least from my perspective, is not meant to be a super casual format. Maybe in the beginning stages or maybe at locals, but even like locals is always more casual than a YCS. Like if you're showing up to a Genesis YCS, I think you should expect people to take it seriously and have at least, I mean, not everyone is playing tier 1 decks. I remember, I think he said in his Twitter post, he said in 11 rounds he played against 10 different decks. So meta is still a very wide term here, you know, like he's talking just about decks that are like not just a pile of cards, basically.
Sticks. As a final note about the actual experience, I will say that I think the matches that they pulled up on camera were not fantastic. My understanding was that they were pulling them based on table numbers, but that ends up getting hairy. As you saw, the Super Quant woman was back to back. and they could have done a little more to screen for decks that had already been on camera. Like, I didn't get to watch the stream, but a lot of people online were whining about the frequency that Cool Toon and Radiant Typhoon were on stream.
What? I have a question about this since I wasn't home to experience any of the streams. How was this handled? Was this like a... Did they have frequent Genesis matches on stream? Did they have... Were they replacing the main events feature matches? Were they in between the main event? Because I feel like the way it should be done, at least the way I feel about it, if they are aiming to make this its own YCS that people care about, I think they should have 2 streams. Quite frankly, I think if they care about this format and they want to promote it and everything, I think they need to do it has to have its own stream. Maybe you can like do some cross promotions, right? Maybe you can have like, okay, now maybe the finals can be all on the same stream, or like the top cut can be all on the same stream. Like let's say I think that's how Pokemon does it sometimes, is like for certain big tournaments you have like separate streams on the Saturday, and then for the finals you have one stream, right? I think they call it Championship Sunday, where it's like all the finals for every game and every age division are happening one after another on one stream. And I think that could be a cool way to do it. Is like, but ultimately I think they should aim for Genesis to have its own coverage for their YCS.
Which I guess would be frustrating if you may have seen those already in the advanced portion. As you can see in the top cut, those decks were around, but weren't nearly as prevalent as coverage made it seem. Like, would it kill them to try and get the Doomsy player on earlier? I don't know if they did. On that note, let's talk about the top decks. First up is Monarch. This shouldn't surprise anyone. I expected this to be the best deck moving in, and it was certainly up there. Monarch has kind of 2 diverging builds. The first is the one that's been featured on this channel that includes Zaborg. I think the 12th place player was also playing this strategy. This deck aims to use Zaborg, the big-ass Mega Monarch, to pop a light monster, usually itself or Aether, then mill 8 cards from its own extra deck, including enough cards to just overwhelm the opponent in advantage. Drawing off Garura, setting up multiple activations of Jurak Meteor, like that's impossible to beat through. Moreover, it also gets to choose the cards to send from the opponent's extra deck, which means you can cut an opponent playing a real deck off of everything. The other...
That sounds like Mega Zaborg should be 100 points to me personally. that really sounds like it should be 100 points.
Build of the deck is the Honko Chow build that did well at the Yugioh organization tournament. That deck plays Garoom, the Wind Vassal, and Mithra to set up a line in...
Turn on tribute summon monster. You control to the hand. Special card from the hand. Can special extra deck. This card's tributed for tribute summon. Add a monster. Okay.
In which you not only Erebus a couple of times, but Thestalos the remaining cards out of an opponent's hand.
Oh, it's a hand loop.
Super consistent 5-card hand loop, but after being interrupted, can pivot down to a lower number and a domain, so they can domain lock you out of the game. That said, the winningest Monarch strategy, the one that I think got second in Swiss, was not doing either of those things. It played 3 copies of Pot of Greed and elected to forego either domain lock or like a stupid Zaborg FTK or hand loop.
That's awesome.
I spoke at length to the pilot, and basically they told me they were Erebusing twice in order to get the opponent down to 4 cards, and then just setting up a Monarch board. The Monarch board is a couple of interactions. You have the ability with the Monarch's Master Plan to tribute on your opponent's turn, which is good, of course. Aether probably needs no introduction. But mostly it's just impossible to kill through the Monarch board. They have the Aether summon, so that's 2 bodies right there. Prime Monarch in the graveyard, which is an additional body. The Monarch's Master Plan permits you to tribute over it, which isn't an additional body, but is interruption. If a Tessera gets into the mix, well, the Tessera goes to the yard, and that's going to summon out an Adio, which is going to summon out an Eidos. And of course, if you ever perform a tribute summon, then Big Eidos comes back from the graveyard. This is like 9 bodies to get through, which is impossible for anything in Genesis. Then on your turn, you automatically win because nothing can beat Stormforth Erebus. I like this deck a great deal. I think the version of it that is not playing any of the bullshit is a lot of fun to have in the format. Next up is Cool Toon. I don't think this surprised anyone. This is a deck that has a very low point total associated with it, benefits off of playing low pointed hand traps, and is new, therefore the cards are a little pushed. Cool Toon is not really seeing success in the TCG, so I think it's good that there is a place where this deck feels at home. I see a lot of people whining that like it's tier 2 in the TCG and why is it playable here? I don't know where you guys are getting your information. This deck is not tier 2 in the
This deck's like tier 8 in the TCG right now.
TCG. Not yet. There's a fun push-pull with this deck in that your hand trap lineup matters a lot when considering this strategy. A lot of situations where like a Skullmeister or a DD Crow can do a lot of work against something like a Remix. But of course, the card that absolutely hoses this deck is Ghost Bell, and a lot of people elected to play this card for that reason, and were very successful with it. I think as people get more familiar with what this deck actually does, it will drop off in terms of like top tieredness. Once they start boarding in kaijus and thinking critically about board states, things will change. For instance, I played the Duelist on Super Quant in a late round, and in game 2, she started reading Zaylin, and I was like, oh no, she's reading Zaylin. And after that, never built a chain ever again, and just won the game off that. Next up is Radiant Typhoon. This deck, like Cool Toon, is a newer archetype. It is drastically unpointed relative to its power level. It just got a cool new card, and it's seeing a smattering of success in the TCG, though in a very
Oh no,
context.
she's reading
Radiant Typhoon has some
Zaylin.
weaknesses in Genesis that it doesn't in the TCG. The Link Varun really solves like the where did the mandate go problem. That's not to say this deck isn't incredibly powerful, and given the Radiant Typhoon has already been powerful at least once in Genesis, I would not be surprised if the update absolutely eviscerates it. We got to talk about Sheena too. Oh my god, Sheena's so good. After that is Draco Tail. This is the one I see the least defense for. This probably should be pointed much higher. It is at least a little frustrating that the deck that I think unquestionably is the best in the TCG is also a top tier strategy in Genesis. This is also one of those decks where like the cards that beat it really beat it. Like people are boarding non-fusion area. Obviously that's really good. And sometimes it sort of loses to itself. You can draw a couple of Urgula and look at a hand that just does nothing and think, why am I playing this? But when it goes off, it's functionally unbeatable. Like there is very little that stands up to it. After that is Armage, another new deck that is drastically underpointed. Not too much to say about this one that hasn't already been said. I think this deck is a welcome addition to the format. I think it's cool that the deck exists in the capacity it does, though it is sort of playable in the TCG in terms of Archmage Canine. The way the deck functions in Genesis is fundamentally different. And finally, Punk Psychic, I think, is a top strategy as well. This is a deck that saw no play in the TCG, and it's not really hard to see why. It's a big, sexy combo deck that takes 1 million damage and loses to Nibiru. But here, Nibiru isn't really guaranteed. You play the new Punk stuff, but you also play the Banish Psychics that came out like a couple of sets ago. You play a board that is super layered, super intense, doesn't really lose to one piece of board breakery. Like, you can fire off an Ulti Slayer and trade for 2 things, but they'll usually have 4 points of interaction. And they can also go into Pep, which is impossible for a significant amount of decks to out. Under that, there are a number of decks that I think are at least playable. Doom Z, playing 1 copy of Premature Burial, I think is one of those decks that sort of justifies Genesis, using a really old card to benefit a really new archetype in a way that just can't ever be done in the TCG. That deck got second at the American Proto YCS. Really unbelievable.
That is kind of awesome.
Individual. Onomat is apparently still around. Same person who
No!
won the last Invitational, topped with it this time.
How?
Who needed Dota Warrior, I guess. White Forest is a deck that's just sort of perennially around in the format. It got a lot as Droll was removed from the list of cards people were considering, but it does still lose to other traps. Exosister, I think, is really good. It's not represented in either of the top 8s, but I think it is.
This is crazy to me. How does Exosister not top? That deck is insane in Genesis, isn't it?
Powerful, and probably the premier Dimension Shifter deck because it can just add it back to the hand. On the subject of decks that make a damn good use out of Dimension Shifter, Goatee, I was surprised to see very little of. There were some in the top 16, and the tool that this deck has gotten recently is the first Penguin, which
75 points engine.
In testing, I never beat Goatee. Finally, Galaxy Regenesis was also represented in the top 16, but of course not the top 8, so no lists are out. That, I think, is comparable to Monarch insofar as if you go first, you automatically win. But a significant amount of people integrated lines from that deck into their normal deck, utilizing Surfacing Big Jaws in order to get to, like, the Mr. Galaxy man. On that note, it's a good pivot to what I think should happen with the points. So the first is that some decks and engines are obviously drastically underpointed. Cool Toon, Archmage, Doomsy, Draco Tail, Radiant Typhoon, Exosister, Monarch, the Surfacing Big Jaws package, all of these could get points associated with them. And I think will. Like, Eidos is the most obvious 10 I've ever seen in my life. Medius is a 10 for sure, and I'm not just saying that because he's a twink.
Medius?
As Exosister and Goatee rise in playability as well, I hope they revisit...
He does this on purpose, right? Mispronounce cards?
Dimension Shifter. I hope it goes the way of the Droll and Lockbird and ends up being like prohibitively expensive. Maybe they splash a singleton copy. I really don't like that card. And I don't think there's sufficient counterplay to it in this format. You can Lancia, but that's not going to help you on your own turn. And I think we do need to have a discussion about banning individual cards. First and foremost, I hate to be like this, but Trinity format has already done the work for you. This format that's been in development for a decade has basically boxed out anything that could even remotely resemble a floodgate. And I'm pretty sure Konami already cross-referenced to the list because a lot of the garbage from that list is 100 pointed in Genesis, like Angel 07. But keep going. Like, there's no reason to keep poisonous winds in the format until it becomes a problem. Non-fusion area could go. Soundproofed can go. Like, these don't make fun games happen. But there are 5 cards I think absolutely must be pointed at 100 pretty much immediately. The first, as mentioned, are Soundproofed and Non-Fusion Area. These cut off entire mechanisms of play, and I don't think they have a place in a game that is going to go to turn 5. Like, it's not fun to play Find the Cosmic Cyclone or Die if you're Draco Tail. It's not fun to play Wait It Out if you're Cool Toon. Speaking of Cool Toon, Gravity Collapse. So I mentioned in my list that Gravity Collapse was the worst performing card in my deck, which is true.
I think it's understandable that they didn't point every single floodgate. Like, we did this on stream like years ago where I made a fun ban list, like, thought experiment where we put every single card that resembles a floodgate on the ban list. And like, I understand they don't want to bloat the point list like that, but then at the very least, you have to start putting points on the stuff that people are actually playing. Like, I think it's okay to say, like, okay, you know what, we don't want to put points on like 200 cards extra to what we already have, because that's going to be too confusing when people look at the list. But as soon as people start playing these cards, you have to do something. Like, the fact that Dimensional Fissure, this is not even just true for the TCG, but also for Genesis, the fact that Dimensional Fissure is still 0 points is insane. The fact that Shifter is on 10 and not higher is insane. And the fact that people start playing Gravity Collapse whenever there's a Synchro deck, and people start playing Non-Fusion Area as soon as there's a Fusion deck, they need to do stuff about that.
But that's
even if it bloats the list a little bit. Like, they need to be more aggressive with this sort of stuff.
Of the decks that are currently popular. All the top decks having ways around this card doesn't mean that there won't be a different format in which decks won't have a way around this card, or that a different synchro deck with more ability to just lose guys doesn't just start splashing this. I will admit, if this card resolves on your opponent's normal summon, you do just straight up win. That's not fun. That's not like fun at all. In fact, I think there's a number of cards that automatically win you the game going first that need to go, which brings me to my next card, Mistaken Arrest. Card seeing a lot of play. It is really frustrating that Droll Lockbird's most annoying use case is doing your whole combo, your opponent takes an action, and you go Droll Lockbird. You can do the same thing with Mistaken Arrest. Sure, it prevents you from popping off on your opponent's turn, but if you've got a full board and setup and follow-up, who cares? And finally, I want to talk specifically about Dimensional Barrier. So I've talked a lot about, is Macro a floodgate in the past? If Konami believes that Macro is not a floodgate, well, then it doesn't really matter. If Konami believes that banishing everything doesn't constitute a floodgate, they're not going to apply the 100 points that floodgates usually get to it. And I think at this point we can definitively say they don't. They think that's okay. But Dimensional Fissure is a little different. Firing Dimensional Fissure turn 1 isn't just Macrocosmos, it's also Called by the Grave. In the TCG, people have been experimenting with Dimensional Fissure going first, and it's caught on a little, but in Genesis, it's a lot better. In the TCG, if your opponent leads Dimensional Barrier, you can still Mulcharmy-Fuelos them, Perulia them, Ash Blossom them. In Genesis, the suite of hand traps is so incredibly truncated that you really can't do a whole lot of anything. The 2 premier free hand traps in the format, DD Crow and Skullmeister, are useless under Dimensional Fissure. I mean, DD Crow's got to go to the graveyard, of course, but obviously you're not going to be activating an effect in the graveyard if there's no graveyard, and there's nothing to banish from the graveyard if there's no graveyard. Keep moving down the list and you check out the 3-pointers, Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit, and Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill. Mourner still works, but Ghost Ogre has to go to the graveyard in order to trigger, which means she's offline as well. Keep moving to the 5s, Ghost Bell and Haunted Mansion shows up, and while this card can be activated under Dimensional Fissure, it won't. Like, you're not going to be banishing cards from the graveyard. There's nothing in the graveyard. And finally, if you move to the 7s, the big one that sees a lot of play is Veiler, who has to go to the graveyard in order to activate. So if you slam down a Dimensional Barrier, you can pretty much stop playing around anything.
This is a really good point. Like, in this regard, if those are the most popular hand traps in Genesis format right now, then Dimensional Fissure is not just a floodgate, but also like a magical mid-breaker field type card where you just don't have to worry about a really big portion of the hand traps anymore.
But Nibiru and Ghost Mourner, a card with pretty limited applicability. And that's bad. Like, that, like, Called by the Grave is pointed to shit. This is just Called by the Grave. So, in conclusion, I had a great time playing Genesys. In its current state, it definitely ranks in the top formats of all time for me, which is crazy. I've played like all of them. But I can't deny that it came at a little bit of an inopportune moment. The potential moment for Genesys was if it took off during a period when the TCG was languishing, when people were just kind of rolling their eyes and getting through events, waiting for a release that would finally make it fun and playable. But the TCG's really good right now. So the question becomes, if the format is good, do we need a place to escape? And that's where I'd like to reconceptualize Genesys. I don't want it to be this liminal format that you play while you wait for a better one to emerge in the real card game. I think this thing only succeeds if it is good in its own right, if it is the modern to Magic's standard, or vice versa. Me personally, despite the fact that the TCG is good, despite the fact I have cards for it, despite the fact that I'm practiced enough I would have loved to enter, I was very proud to play Genesys at the 300th YCS. And I had a crazy good time doing so. Of the games I played, almost all of them were incredibly back and forth, meaty games with a lot of decision points. There was a lot of room for players to express their individual skill and be rewarded for it. There were so few times when the cards I complained about above even mattered. Like I said, in something like 30 games I played, I think I gravity collapsed once in a game that may have mattered. If you are looking for an escape from the TCG, I really would urge you not to try out Genesys. I think you should be playing it if you love Yu-Gi-Oh! And want more. As a final...
I think this is a wonderful point, because as someone who's basically played as much Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG in my life as humanly possible, Genesys format is, I do think it is distinctly different from Advanced Constructed in a lot of different ways. And I do not look at Genesys as a replacement or something that I can escape to whenever the Advanced Constructed format sucks or whatever. Genuinely, the Advanced Constructed format at the moment is really, really cool and awesome. But so is Genesys, but in different ways. Genesys offers a different type of environment. The power level and balancing and just the fundamentals of the game are different. It is not like Time Wizard, but it's genuinely, it is very refreshing because it's just a different, it's the same game, the same mechanics, but it's a different premise of like, there is less building a broken board on turn one. There is less maneuvering through hand traps. There is less deciding games via non-engine. There's a lot more like engine versus engine, and a lot more I make a good board but not an unbreakable board that you can now play into with your engine. And at the same time, everything is a little bit lower power level as well, because the really powerful engines all have high points on them. So if you are playing a deck that, or if, and honestly, it is a place, even though he said like, okay, there's a lot of meta at these tournaments and people are really trying, still, in my experience, you can play pet decks way more effectively in Genesys format. You know, if you're going to a YCS, are you going to have the best chances of winning if you play, I don't know, your pet deck Necros or whatever, like, or if I play my pet Dragon Ruler deck, I'm still going to have a harder time than if I was playing Vanquish Soul, but the gap is not as big as it is in Advanced Constructed sometimes. Because the best decks in Advanced Constructed still get to play the best non-engine. So the best decks in Advanced Constructed are ahead on both fronts. Or at least they're ahead with the engine, but the non-engine is at least the same. And the rogue decks have basically don't even have the advantage of getting to play more non-engine that's powerful. In Genesys, you make up the gap a little bit of, you know, your deck is stronger than mine, so you don't get to play the powerful non-engine, but I do. Or I get to play Pot of Greed and you don't. So in some games, I just have more cards than you, and that will help. So I've just had nothing but positive experiences with Genesys so far, and I really don't want people to just view it as like, oh, this is like an alternative to Advanced Constructed whenever I don't enjoy Advanced Constructed. This is something that, like he said, I really can't put it any better, but if you love playing Yu-Gi-Oh!, if you ever have back and forth games in Advanced Constructed and you think to yourself like, yeah, that was really fun, I think you can just have more of that in Genesys, and you can just play both formats at the same time. Which is gonna lead me to the other thing, which is like, I was a little disappointed that, you know, they were happening simultaneously because I had to choose. I don't want to choose. I don't want to choose between Genesys and Advanced Constructed because I think both are awesome. I would have loved to play in both YCSs, you know? Which is why I was so excited when they announced that Genesys would get its own YCS last year. And now they decided to put them together, which I think is also good for other reasons, because, you know, Genesys getting its own YCS, like, because this means there's going to be 4, 5, 6 Genesys YCSs per year in NA, and then I don't know how many YCSs you guys get, but we're going to have like 3 or 4, and that's good. That is good for Genesys format to have that much exposure, that much like opportunities to play. The format at a proper competitive level is going to be great for the format. But at the same time, for me, it means I'm always going to have to choose. And that's why one of the suggestions that came up during the last time we talked about this, I think, is they could just do day 1 for Genesys on Friday. Because in Europe, I think it was Genesys on Saturday was 5 rounds. And then they did the remaining Swiss rounds and top 8 on Sunday. So if you're only doing 5 rounds on Saturday, why not do them on Friday? Why not do it on Friday? They have other public events on Friday. They have other stuff like the 3 versus 3 or whatever on Friday that you can play, and that's also 4 or 5 rounds or whatever. Like, why not do Genesys day 1 on Friday, main event day 1 on Saturday, and then on Sunday you have both day 2s? And so the only way you have to choose between Genesys and Advanced Constructed is if you make day 2 in both of them. Then sure, you have to decide. But realistically, I think that would be the best way to do it.
Final note, I did get to talk to some Konami executives about Genesys format, and they told me, bar none, the best thing that can be done for the health of the format is for people to use the hashtag Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesys and post lists they are playing or lists they are seeing from their locals. If you have an OTS that's hosting Genesys events, be the dickhead that gets those lists. If you are brewing, post them online. And please, please, please use the
because NA doesn't do side events on Fridays. I mean, yeah, sure, but Europe does, right? I'm talking from the European perspective at least, right? Like, I guess then if it's not possible in the US for some reason and they're never doing side events on Friday, then sure. But in Europe, we do have the opportunity. And we also have the space on the Friday, right? Because they're not needed. They don't need the entire venue for the main event on Friday yet. You know, there's an incredible amount of space on the Friday for this sort of thing. So you could even increase the cap from 256 to like 512, and then everyone gets to play day 1 for Genesys, and then on Sunday, if you make day 2 in Genesys and your day 1 in the main event doesn't work out, you can play that or the other way around, and so on. I think it'd be awesome.
Hashtag Yu-Gi-Oh! Genesys when you do so. There will be more Genesys content on this channel. I'll be playing it at future events, and I hope to see you there as well.
All right. I thought this was a pretty wholesome look into the format. It's kind of what I expected after reading through the Twitter thread that he did. But I thought I still wanted to take a look at it because I think this is something I personally didn't experience as much of Genesys this last YCS because I played the Advanced Constructed main event and they took it away from the Friday, the Genesys qualifiers. So this was something that I was interested in and how Genesys felt for the people. And even though I didn't participate in Genesys, I care about this format. I think it's awesome. And as a general fan of Yu-Gi-Oh, I can see myself, you know, I can see myself participating in Genesys format over the Advanced Constructed main event at some point if I just really love the format. But I honestly don't think it needs to be this sort of thing where you always compare. I think it's just something that you can really enjoy both, and I do that. I do enjoy both formats, so I care about Genesys as well, and I was really hoping that people had a good time playing it. And from what from everything I hear all the time is everyone I'm talking to who plays Genesys has an awesome time. 99% of people I talk to who play Genesys have a good time. And all the negative stuff I hear about Genesys is usually from people where I feel like they haven't given the format a proper chance and haven't really participated actively in it, which I think it's completely okay if you're not interested in Genesys, or because you are so caught up with Advanced Constructed and you love Advanced Constructed so much and that's enough for you and everything. Completely reasonable. You know, you don't want to spend more time than what you're spending already on Advanced Constructed, or if you want to spend more time with Yu-Gi-Oh, then you would rather put even more time into Advanced Constructed. All reasonable, okay? But I think a lot of the arguments that are brought up against Genesys, genuinely, from my perspective, are not correct and don't reflect my experience with the format. And I think the only reason people reach those conclusions is because they don't properly play the format. Like when people say like, oh, it's just the same decks as they are in Advanced Constructed, like even Draco Tail, okay? The Draco Tail, I can see the argument of like, okay, if I'm facing Draco Tail cards in Advanced Constructed, I don't want to face them in Genesys. Okay, sure, I get that. But realistically still, as someone who plays Yu-Gi-Oh at pretty much the highest level there is, Draco Tail in Genesys is not the same as Draco Tail in Advanced Constructed. Okay, the power level difference between those decks is insane. Okay, it's not the same. I understand if you don't want to see the same play style, I guess, between the two formats, but power level wise, it is night and day between Genesys and Advanced Constructed when you're talking Draco Tail. And also Vanquish Soul. The difference between Genesys Vanquish Soul and Advanced Constructed Vanquish Soul is night and day. They are not the same deck.